Some mornings, you wake up and already know what the day is going to ask of you. Tuesday wasn't one of those mornings. I was halfway through my second alarm, mentally organizing a code review I had at 9, when I reached for my phone out of habit. The screen showed one missed call, timestamp from 40 minutes earlier, when I was still asleep. The name on the screen was David. My older brother, the one who coordinates family logistics like a project manager who never got promoted past his own family, does not call before 7 in the morning. David schedules things. David sends calendar invites. David does not call at 6:47 on a Tuesday unless something has already gone wrong and is waiting for me to catch up. I called back before I was fully awake. He picked up on the second ring. Dad's gone. He said it the way you'd say a flight got canceled. Factual. Already passed it. Heart attack last night. Mom found him this morning. I sat on the edge of the bed and stopped functioning for a few seconds. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the room to feel different. Long enough for my wife Sarah to wake up and put her hand on my back without asking why. "Marcus?" David's voice came through the phone again. "You there?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm here." There was a pause. A short one. The kind that means the emotional portion of the conversation is now concluded. "We're handling the arrangements," David said. "It'll be a private service. Graveside. Small." "Okay." I was still processing the first part of what he'd told me. "When?" "Friday." "But..." Another pause. Shorter this time. "We're keeping it very immediate. Just me, Mom, and Rebecca." I thought I'd misheard him. "I'm coming," I said. "Marcus, he's my father." "I know, but Dad pre-planned everything. He wanted it intimate. Just the three of us. That was his wish." I want to be precise about what happened in my head at that moment, because it wasn't anger. Not yet. It was more like the feeling when you're reading something and you have to go back to the beginning of the sentence because the words didn't make sense the first time. "Dad pre-planned to exclude me from his funeral," I said. "He wanted it quiet." "I'm not a crowd, David. I'm his son. I have to go. Mom needs me." He hung up. The man had just lost his father. And 30 seconds later, he found out he wasn't invited to say goodbye. Most people would have called that the worst part of the day. Marcus was about to find out it wasn't even close. Sarah was already watching me when I lowered the phone. I told her. All of it. The heart attack, the funeral, the part where David explained that I was not included in the definition of immediate family. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said several things, none of which I'll repeat here, but all of which were accurate. I texted my mother, a woman who had raised me, who I called every few weeks, who sent me birthday cards with handwritten notes inside. I asked her to call me. Simple. One sentence. Then I texted my younger sister Rebecca, who works in HR and therefore communicates exclusively in careful, liability-free language. I asked if we could talk about Friday. Then I waited. Sarah made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at nothing in particular. An hour later, Mom replied, "David is handling everything. Please respect our privacy right now." Our privacy, from her own son. I read it 3 times trying to find the version where it said something different. Rebecca's message came an hour after that. "Whatever David decided is final. Sorry." That sorry was doing a lot of heavy lifting for a 2-word text. No phone calls, no explanations. Nothing from anyone else in the family. Just 2 texts that both said, in different ways, "The decision is made, and you are not part of it." I put the phone down and sat with that for a while. Here's the thing about being the invisible one in a family. It doesn't happen all at once. Nobody sits down and votes on it. It accumulates the way water damage does, slowly, quietly, until one day you press on something and it just gives. My older brother David had been the benchmark my entire life. Not because he was exceptional, because he was first. First promotion got a dinner at the nicest restaurant in the city. Speeches, my father's hand on his shoulder. My promotion to lead architect, managing a team of 11, salary that made David's look like a starting offer, got a nod, and, that sounds stable, right? From my mother before she moved on to asking David about his kitchen renovation. The renovation got 143 messages in the family group chat. Tile samples, cabinet hardware, 2 weeks of daily updates like it was a nature documentary. I posted once, shipped a product that got written up in 2 industry publications. A photo, a short caption, 3 emoji reactions. My aunt's thumbs up, my mother's heart, a smiley from a cousin who I'm fairly certain reacts to everything. Nobody asked what the product did. I didn't stop showing up. I kept coming to holidays, sending cards, answering the group chat with short responses that confirmed I was still alive. But I stopped volunteering information, stopped raising my hand, stopped expecting the room to turn toward me. It was easier. Not better, just easier. By the time I was in my 40s, I had a career my family couldn't quite locate on a map, a marriage to a woman they'd met 4 times, and a general understanding that I was the supporting character in a story that wasn't about me. I had made my peace with that. Or something that resembled peace if you didn't look too closely. And then my father died on a Tuesday, and my brother called to tell me I wasn't invited. I went through the rest of Wednesday in a low hum of numbness. Sarah handled things around me. Food appeared, the apartment stayed organized, she fielded a few calls I didn't have the capacity to take. She didn't push me to talk. She knows when talking helps and when it doesn't, which is one of approximately 10,000 reasons I married her. Mid-afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched when my phone buzzed. Email notification, not a text, an email. The sender was Eternal Rest Funeral Home, Family Portal. The subject line read, Memorial Service Livestream Information. I looked at it for a long moment without opening it. David had said the service was private. Graveside. 3 people. Private funerals don't typically come with live stream infrastructure. I opened the email. It was formatted and professional. It thanked me for being part of the family of the deceased. It provided a date, a time, a location, and then, near the bottom, it provided a link. A live stream link. And below that, one sentence that I read twice. This notification was sent to all immediate family members listed in the deceased's pre-planning documentation. I set the phone down on the table. Then I picked it back up and read that sentence again. Listed in the deceased's pre-planning documentation. My father, who had, at some point before he died, sat down with someone at Eternal Rest Funeral Home and provided a list of his family members, and put my name on it. Dad had listed me. Dad had wanted me to have access. The funeral home didn't make a mistake. The system did exactly what it was told to do, by the man who pre-planned everything. Dad had listed his son. Dad wanted him to have access. The only person who decided otherwise was David. I called Sarah into the kitchen. I showed her the email. She read it once, then looked up at me. We didn't need to say much. The math was straightforward. Dad's own pre-planning had included me. David had looked at that list and made a different decision, and had then told me it was Dad's wish. I thought about calling David right then. I didn't. There was nothing he could say that would improve the situation, and I'd spent enough of my life accepting explanations that didn't hold up. I wasn't in the mood for another one. I saved the email, moved it to a folder, did not delete it. Then I went back to the kitchen table, sat down across from Sarah, and we stayed there for a while in the kind of quiet that isn't empty. It's full of things that don't need to be said out loud. Friday was 2 days away. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with a live stream link to my own father's funeral. Friday. A few minutes before the service was scheduled to start, I opened my laptop. I don't know what I expected to feel when I clicked the link. I'd spent 2 days telling myself I hadn't decided anything yet, that I was just keeping the option open, that a reasonable person could receive a live stream link to their father's funeral and simply choose not to use it. File it away, move on. I clicked it at about 5 minutes before the service was scheduled to start. Sarah sat down next to me on the couch without asking. She didn't say anything about it being a good idea or a bad one. She just sat down, which is its own kind of answer. The stream buffered for a few seconds. Then the image loaded. The first thing I noticed was the chairs. Not 3 chairs. Not a small graveside cluster of immediate family. Rows of white folding chairs arranged in a clean arc around the burial site, The way you'd set up a proper outdoor ceremony. I counted the rows before I counted anything else, out of habit. Software brain. Rows times columns first. More than 40 chairs. Easily. 12 flower arrangements positioned around the perimeter. The large professional kind that come in standing easels and cost more than my first car payment. In the corner of the screen, small gray text read, 8 viewers watching. Private funeral. 8 viewers. 40 plus chairs. I didn't say anything out loud. Neither did Sarah. About 5 minutes later, people began arriving in frame. I recognized the first face immediately. My father's older brother, my Uncle Tom, who taught me to fish when I was 9 years old and who still sends a card every year on my birthday with a $20 bill inside, regardless of the fact that I am a 45-year-old man with a mortgage. He walked into frame in a dark suit, moving carefully the way he does now that his hip has been replaced, and took a seat in the second row. Behind him, my Aunt Linda, Tom's wife, who makes the potato salad at every family gathering and has been making it the same way for 30 years and will not discuss modifications. She sat next to Tom and put her hand on his arm. Then 4 of my cousins. Then my dad's closest friend Jim, who I'd known since before I could form reliable memories, who my father had played golf with every Saturday for 22 years. Jim sat in the 4th row and looked at his hands. 3 more of Dad's golf friends. 6 neighbors from the street I grew up on, whose names I knew, whose kids I'd gone to school with. And then more people. People I recognized from a distance. People I'd met at holidays, at graduations, at the kind of family events that accumulate over a lifetime. I started counting. 12, then 20. Then somewhere around 30 I lost track and started over. 43 people. 43 people at my father's private funeral. Meanwhile, the viewer counter in the corner of the screen had been doing its own thing quietly. 8, then 34. Then, by the time the last of the in-person guests had taken their seats, 89. I watched it tick upward. 102. 115. 127. It stopped climbing around there and held. 127 people watching online. 43 in person. That's 170 people at a funeral David described as just the 3 of us. At some point, private stopped meaning what David thought it meant. The minister stepped forward. He was a tall man, unhurried, with the particular cadence of someone who has done this many times and understands that the pace of the thing matters. He thanked everyone for coming. He mentioned the flowers. He looked directly at the camera once and said, "We also want to welcome those joining us virtually today. We have over 120 of you watching, and we're glad you're here." Over 120 of us. I was one of them. The camera panned slowly across the crowd while the minister spoke. I watched it move from row to row. Tom and Linda in the 2nd row. Jim in the 4th, head slightly bowed. The cousins I'd grown up with. The neighbors who'd watched me learn to ride a bike on that street. All there. All invited. All present. I said nothing to Sarah. She said nothing to me. About 20 minutes into the service, David stood up. My older brother, who managed the guest list, who made the phone calls, who decided what private meant and who it included, walked to the front with his shoulders back and his jaw set, the way he does when he's performing competence for an audience. He's good at that. He always has been. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about Dad's love of golf, his work ethic, his habit of fixing things around the house even when they didn't strictly need fixing. He said Dad believed that showing up for people was the most important thing a man could do. I want to be precise about that part. Showing up for people. Then David looked out at the crowd. 43 people, rows of white chairs, 12 flower arrangements, and said, "Looking around today, seeing all of you here, I know we gave him exactly what he wanted, surrounded by the people who mattered most." The people who mattered most. Sarah put her hand on my arm. I didn't move. I kept watching the screen. Watched the camera hold on David's face for a moment. Composed, controlled, doing what David does, which is managing the optics of every situation he's ever been in. Then the camera pulled back to show the crowd again. 170 people, the people who mattered most. About 15 minutes later, they lowered the casket. I watched that too. My mother, standing in the front row where she'd stood for 51 years of marriage, put her face against David's shoulder. She was wearing black and holding a single white flower that she'd been turning in her hand since she sat down. Rebecca stood on her other side and placed her flower on the casket first, then stepped back. I was watching this on a 13-inch laptop screen, from 800 miles away, on a couch in my living room. The service ended about 40 minutes after it started. People stood, hugged, moved in the slow, careful way people move after something like this. The camera kept streaming while the crowd dispersed. I watched Uncle Tom stop and speak to Jim for a few minutes, both of them standing near the edge of the grave. I watched my cousins drift toward the parking area. I watched David speak to the minister with his hand extended, already transitioning into logistics. I watched until the stream went dark. Black screen. In the corner, the viewer count had frozen where it was. 127. I stared at the black screen for probably a full minute. Maybe longer. Sarah didn't say anything and I didn't either. The apartment was very quiet. Then she asked, "Are you okay?" I thought about that for a second. "I'm going to take some screenshots," I said. I moved to the desk in the home office and opened the stream again. It was still accessible, the recording already saved in the portal. I paused it at the clearest frame of the crowd. 43 people visible, seated in rows. Timestamp in the corner of the stream. I screenshotted it. Then I went back to the live viewer count peak, which the portal showed in the session summary. 127. Screenshotted that too. I saved both images to a folder I labeled with my father's name and the date. Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Why are you doing that?" "Because someone is going to try to rewrite this," I said, "and I want to make sure they can't." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded once. I closed the laptop. Then I opened a new message to David. I typed 4 words. Attached both screenshots. Sent it. 4 words. 2 attachments. Sent. I put the phone face down on the desk and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. Not because I was thirsty, just because sitting still felt wrong. David's phone was on silent. He'd turned it off for the service and apparently hadn't turned it back on yet. So the message sat there, delivered, unread, while he was somewhere 80 miles away, probably accepting condolences and shaking hands and being the one who handled everything. I waited. About 20 minutes after I sent it, the phone lit up. David was calling. I let it ring twice. Then I picked up. "How did you get that link?" Not a question. The tone of a man who has just walked into a room and found something he didn't expect. "The funeral home emailed me," I said. "Turns out Dad listed me in his pre-planning documents. The system sent the link automatically to everyone on the family list." Silence for a moment. "The funeral home wasn't supposed to—" "Dad listed me, David. His pre-planning. His list. His decision. That's not— Marcus, you have to understand, Mom thought it would be easier for you. Watching from home instead of—" "I counted 43 people." He stopped. 43 people at the private funeral, that was just the 3 of you," I said. "Plus 127 watching online. The minister thanked the virtual audience by name. I was in that audience. We were trying to protect you from a difficult—" I watched them lower the casket on a laptop screen, from 800 miles away, while Uncle Tom and Jim and 6 of our neighbors sat in chairs 30 feet from my father's grave. I paused. That's what the protection looked like from my end. David tried a few more angles. Mom's emotional state. The logistics of a last-minute flight. The idea that watching from home was still being there in a way. I let him finish each one. Then I said, "You told me it was just the 3 of you. Those were your exact words. I have the text." He hung up. David had spent 20 years being the one who handled things, organized things, decided things. He was very good at it, right up until the moment the funeral home's automated system sent an email he didn't know about. You can lie to a person. You can't lie to a timestamp. About an hour after the call, I opened the family group chat. 47 members. The full extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, a few family friends who'd been in the thread long enough that nobody remembered adding them. I wrote one message. No preamble, no emotional framing, no request for anything. Just the sequence of events in order. David's text saying, "Private, just the three of us." The funeral home email with the pre-planning documentation note. The screenshot of 43 people seated at the graveside. The viewer count screenshot showing 127. I attached both screenshots. I sent it and put the phone down. The responses started coming in inside of 3 minutes. My Uncle Tom, the man I'd watched walk into frame in his dark suit, careful with his replaced hip, sent the first reply. He had no idea I wasn't there. David had told him I couldn't travel. Work conflict, apparently. Tom said he would have called me if he'd known. He said it twice. Aunt Linda followed. Same story from her end. Couldn't make it for work reasons. David had mentioned it when she'd asked where I was. 3 cousins in quick succession, each one a variation of the same theme. Shock. Some version of, "We had no idea." One of them said she'd assumed I'd chosen not to fly in and hadn't wanted to bring it up. Dad's closest friend Jim, the man who had sat in the 4th row with his head bowed, sent a longer message. He thought I'd decided not to attend. He said he'd considered reaching out but didn't want to intrude on whatever I was going through. He said he was sorry. He said my father talked about me often. That last part I read twice. What emerged from the next 45 minutes of group chat activity was a fairly clear picture. David had given a different story to each person who'd asked, all of them variations on the same theme. Marcus wasn't coming, couldn't make it, had his reasons. Nobody had been given a reason to question it. Nobody had called me directly to check. 47 people. One story each, tailored to whoever was asking. Nobody compared notes until now. I stopped reading the chat around the point where it became mostly people talking to each other. I'd said what I needed to say. The screenshots were there. The timeline was there. I didn't need to manage the conversation. 2 days later, David sent an email to the entire family list. It was long. I'll give him credit for the length. He clearly put time into it. The central argument was that I was making a private family matter into a public grievance at the worst possible time, that the family was already in pain, and that my behavior was putting the focus on me instead of on honoring our father. He used the phrase, "making this about himself," twice. I read it once, then opened a blank document. I put in 4 things, in order. David's original text message, screenshotted with the timestamp visible. The funeral home email, full text, with the pre-planning documentation line highlighted. The screenshot of 43 people at the graveside. The viewer count screenshot. No commentary, no editorial, no explanation of what the reader should conclude. I replied to all. The document was the reply. A few people responded to say they'd received it. David did not respond at all. The email thread went quiet after that, which is what happens when the evidence is the argument, and the argument is over. About a week after the funeral, my mother called. She didn't want to do this over the phone, she said. She wanted me to come home, sit at the table, talk face-to-face the way the family was supposed to handle things. I told her I'd join by Zoom. She said, "Don't be petty about this." I said, "I watched Dad's funeral through a laptop. I'm being consistent." She was quiet for a moment, then said she'd send me the meeting link. The call had 15 people on it. Tom and Linda, 3 cousins, Rebecca, a couple of aunts. My mother at the center of the frame, seated at the kitchen table I'd grown up eating at. David off to one side, jaw set, already in position. David opened with a prepared statement about family unity and grief, and how conflict wasn't what our father would have wanted. When he finished, I shared my screen. I played the eulogy clip. Just the relevant section, maybe 90 seconds. David's voice, the camera pulling back to show the crowd. The phrase, "the people who mattered most," landing over a wide shot of 43 people in white chairs. Nobody on the call said anything while it played. When it ended, I stopped sharing. Tom was the first to speak. He asked David directly why he'd told everyone I wasn't coming. David started to answer. Mom cut him off. She said she'd made the decision, that she'd asked David to handle it her way, that she thought having me there would make an already emotional day harder to manage, that watching from home was supposed to be a kindness. She said she could see now that she was wrong. I waited until she finished. You made a decision about how I would grieve my own father, I said, without asking me, while telling me it was his wish, and while inviting 170 other people. I paused. I watched them lower his casket on a 13-inch screen. You can't give that back. Nobody responded to that. I left the call. I didn't answer the messages that came in afterward. Not that evening, not the next day. My phone had plenty of activity. I let it. 3 months later, something arrived in the mail. A letter. Handwritten. My mother's return address in the corner. 3 pages. The letter sat on the kitchen counter for about an hour before I opened it. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope. She still writes in the same careful cursive she used when she signed my school permission slips, which is one of those details that lands differently when you're holding something you're not sure you want to read. 3 pages. Both sides of the first 2, one side of the third. She explained that David had come to her the night before the funeral, had told her that having me there, in person, at the graveside, would make things harder, that I'd always worn my emotions on the outside, that managing my reaction on top of everything else would be too much. She said she'd believed him because she was exhausted and grief-stricken, and he was standing in front of her telling her what the day needed to look like. She said she understood now that she had been wrong. She asked me to come for Thanksgiving. Said she wanted to make it right. Said the family needed to find a way back to each other. I read it twice. Then I sat at the table for a few minutes. Then I wrote back. 1 sentence. I thanked her for writing and told her I needed more time than she probably wanted me to need. I put it in an envelope, addressed it, walked it to the mailbox. That was the extent of it. Thanksgiving came about 6 weeks after that. I didn't go. Sarah and I cooked at home. Just the 2 of us. The good cutting board out, music on, no timeline. It was the first Thanksgiving in years where I didn't spend the drive home debriefing what had gone wrong at the table or which comment I should have responded to differently or whether I'd said something that landed the wrong way. Nobody called to ask where I was. No texts checking in. The group chat had a few holiday messages that day, photos of food, a few family members tagging each other, and then went quiet by evening. Christmas was quieter than Thanksgiving. We went for a walk in the morning, made something complicated for dinner, watched a film we'd been meaning to watch for 2 years. Sarah fell asleep on the couch before 10. At no point did I feel like I was missing something. There's a version of this where Marcus forgives everyone and shows up for Christmas, sits at the table, pretends, moves on. Some people call that maturity. Marcus had spent 45 years doing exactly that. He decided to try something else. About 6 months after the funeral, an email came in from Eternal Rest Funeral Home. The subject line read, "Your live stream access will expire in 24 hours. I read it twice before I did anything. Then I opened the link. Sarah was in the other room. I didn't call her in. I just sat at the desk and started the recording from the beginning. The way you'd watch something you already know the ending of. 43 minutes. I watched the whole thing. The chairs filling up, the minister stepping forward, Uncle Tom in the second row, Jim in the fourth, head bowed, David at the front, composed and controlled. My mother in black with the white flower she kept turning in her hands. The eulogy. The people who mattered most. The casket going down. I watched until the stream cut to black and the viewer count froze at 127. Then I sat there for a minute. Then I downloaded the file. It saved as a standard video file, 2.3 gigabytes, the kind of file size that means nothing to most people and means a full-length recording to anyone who works with video. I renamed it with my father's name and the date. I added a text note in the file properties. 43 people in person, 127 online. David's original message had said, just the 3 of us. Not for anyone else. Just so the file could speak for itself if it ever needed to. I moved it to a folder I don't open often and closed the laptop. A few days after that, a letter came in the mail from my Uncle Tom. Tom is my father's older brother, the man with the replaced hip and the annual birthday card with the $20 bill, the man who taught me to fish when I was 9. He had written the letter by hand, which at his age is not a small thing and which I noted before I even read the content. He said he hadn't known. Said he'd thought about reaching out after the group chat, but wanted to give me space and then time kept passing the way it does. Said he was sorry he hadn't picked up the phone before the funeral to ask me directly where I was. Short letter. Maybe a page. No dramatic declarations, no promises about confronting David, no positioning himself as the good one in the family. Just a straightforward account of what he knew, what he wished he'd done differently, and that he hoped I was okay. I wrote back the same week, thanked him. Mentioned a few things about my father that I thought Tom might not have known. A conversation we'd had a couple of years ago, something Dad had said about their childhood. Kept it short, sealed it, and mailed it. We've exchanged a few letters since then. Nothing dramatic, just two people keeping a thread alive. 47 people in that group chat. One of them wrote a letter without being asked. One of them said sorry without being caught. That's not a small thing. That's actually the whole point. The family group chat still exists. I'm still in it technically, though I haven't posted since the night I shared the screenshots. Messages come in occasionally. Birthdays, the odd news item someone thinks is worth sharing, a photo now and then. I read them sometimes and don't respond. Nobody addresses me directly. The last time David posted in the chat was months ago. I don't remember what it was about. Something logistical. The recording sits in its folder on my desktop. I haven't opened it since the night I downloaded it. I don't need to. I know what's in it. I know what the file note says. I know that if anyone ever tries to rewrite what happened, and someone eventually will, because that's what families do with the parts that reflect badly on them, the file is there, not as a weapon, just as a record. Sarah walked past the office doorway one evening a few months after all of this and glanced at the desktop and asked what the file was. I told her. She looked at it for a second, then nodded and kept walking. That was the right response. Some things you keep, not because you plan to use them, but because having them means you don't have to carry the weight of maybe being wrong about what you saw. The file means I wasn't wrong. I watched it. All 127 of us did. Here's what Marcus understood that his brother never will. There are events that happen exactly once. A father's funeral is one of them. You don't get a second service. You don't get another graveside. You don't get to reinvite the person you excluded and call it even. David made one decision on one Tuesday morning and used it to answer a question Marcus had been asking his entire life. Where do I rank in this family? Now he knows. And knowing, it turns out, is its own kind of closure. The live stream link expired. The recording didn't. And Marcus stopped waiting for a family that had already told him everything he needed to hear.